All right, good afternoon. Well, I guess it's good evening, everybody. I tried to record this earlier and try to upload it, but when I went to upload it, I guess I got a copyright strike due to some of the music I was playing on it. So we got to remove all the music and redo it, but that's fine. I don't mind doing it again. It wasn't too bad. We are going to talk today a little bit about the constructor responses on your test. So you got a midterm coming up, got a couple of constructor responses on it. And I want to go over kind of what the questions are and what I'm looking for in the answer. So let's take a look over here at some of the constructor responses, right? So first and foremost, we're going to start off with in an extended response of at least 3 paragraphs, we're talking about 500 words, answer the question, did the New Deal solve the depressions encountered by people during the Great Depression? In your answer, explain how the Great Depression impacted different groups differently. Well, spoiler alert, it did not solve the Great Depression, right? So the Great Depression, you're gonna have a lot of these charts and graphs and stuff like that on the test, so you'll be fine on that. But you'll be able to quickly notice that no, it didn't solve the Great Depression. Like the Great Depression will still continue on after he started the New Deal. So he starts the New Deal, and it just kind of keeps lingering on. But that was never even really the intention. I mean, I'm sure he would have loved for the Great Depression to have ended, but that was never really the intention of the New Deal. The New Deal was really to do 2 things, and this is what you need to put on your paper. The first thing is you got to survive, right? Things like Social Security, things like paying farmers not to farm, bread lines, stuff like that. That's all temporary jobs. It's all designed around allowing people to survive the Great Depression. The second thing its job was to do is when we get out of the Great Depression, we don't want to slide right back into another one. The best example of that was, remember we talked about the problem with the stock market collapse, right? So the stock market collapses, and then a lot of rich people start buying up stock to try to like revitalize the stock market, and it works temporarily, right? Remember we kind of talked about it was like the clear bump, the defibrillator, and it's like boo, doot, kind of bringing it back to life. Well, when the banks collapse, it's like boop, boo, it just dies, right? Completely goes off the rails and dies. And so it's trying to stop that from happening. I mean, make no mistake, in the pandemic, if we had no FDIC insurance, there was nothing supporting the banks, we probably would have slid back into another depression. I know I would have taken any money I had in the bank out. And I probably would have been one of many that would have done so, and the banks would have collapsed all over again. So the first thing you need to talk about is know that a New Deal did not solve the Great Depression. That would not happen until the war, but it was never really intended to, right? It was designed to allow people to survive it and prevent it from happening in the future once we got out of it, because I think everybody kind of realized eventually we'd get out of the Depression. Then it asks you the question of how did different groups handle it differently? Well, obviously we talked about everybody suffered in the Great Depression, right? There were a lot of people that really, really hurt. My family was hurt. But then we talked about a couple groups. So, for example, we talked about black people, right? They were first fired, last hired. And they really, really struggled with unemployment throughout the Great Depression. But they still would support FDR because they're still getting some of that benefit of some of those relief programs. And they're able to survive the Great Depression, although they're not doing as well as some other counterparts were doing. Then we talked about women. Remember, we talked about how during the Great Depression they actually gained employment. But then there starts being like this feud between a pin money worker. What does it mean to be a married woman versus a not married woman? So they kind of processes it where it creates this like division, but they still grow their employment numbers. So they kind of do well in spite of society fighting against them, but they still succeed. And then we talked about Native Americans, right? And how they kind of band together and create the Indian Reorganization Act, and they turn their land into sovereign territory. It kind of creates like a bubble that kind of protects them a little bit from the Great Depression. So that's what you're looking for in that one. The second one is to explain the main points of the 14-point plan and explain how it failed in at least a paragraph. Now, obviously, the 14-point plan had 14 points to it, right? But there were 2 that were chief amongst the things that they were looking for, right? And so the big dogs that he was fighting for was the first one. He wanted a League of Nations, right? This giant mega alliance of countries that would all come together and prevent us from having another World War II. And, of course, the other one he wants is he does not want Germany to have suffer heavy war reparations. Now, he sells this plan in Europe, right? Europe's on board. They kind of don't like the idea of not giving war reparations to Germany, but they're on board with it. But he can't get America to sign off on it. And part of that is because America is still very much an isolationist nation. Remember, think back to the Washington Farewell Address. It's part of what allowed us to survive so well after World War I. So we're very much an isolationist nation. And so he goes on tour trying to sell it, but then he has a stroke. And he kind of recuperates from it, and he goes back on tour selling it, but then he has a second stroke. And when it's all said and done, he just can't sell it anymore. The whole thing goes belly up. And then last but not least, we get the League of Nations. The United States is not part of it. And they decide to punish the ever-loving crap out of Germany, so Germany is going to end up suffering heavy war reparations. So those are the key parts I'm looking for in that one. In about a paragraph, right? Just basically I need you to know that, he wants no heavy war reparations in League of Nations. It fails because he can sell it in Europe, but he can't sell it at home due to serious strokes. And then talk about how, because of that, we have a League of Nations, but no U.S. involvement. And we have a series of heavy war operations in Germany. Okay, so hopefully that helps you out, and it's going to get you ready for the midterm. If you have any questions, hit me up on the app. And, yeah, good luck on the midterm. I will see you on Monday.